So how can Academy be implemented here at UM? Well, the first thing to do is reshuffle the lecture material into something that's a little bit more conducive to a video-based format. So let's take a look at the cardiovascular module as an example. And the first thing that we do is break down the module into a series of nested units, the broadest way of dividing up the material. So I'll just go ahead and write that here in red, units. And each of these red boxes here represents a hypothetical unit for a cardiovascular module. Now each unit's pretty broad, and our examples here are first, cardiovascular physiology. Second, you have CV pharmacology. Third, cardiovascular disease. And fourth, cardiovascular pathology. Opening up one of these units gives access to an organized substructure. So here we're looking at what the inside of the CV physiology unit might look like. Each unit is broken down into a series of topics, which are here in purple. So I'll just write that. Topics. And the hypothetical first topic of our CV physiology unit might be structure and function. And then within each topic, these are then broken down into a series of concepts. And these concepts are the kind of smallest unit which the students are going to get to know themselves. So the individual concept here might be something like anatomy, in which case there would be a series of short videos. So I'll just write that in. And then having completed the videos, a series of questions or some type of evaluation so the students can know that they've mastered the material that they need to know before moving on. So the next concept they might come across would be something like muscle cells, which would have its own set of videos and questions. And finishing that, they can move on to learn about the electrical activity of the heart, having its own videos and questions, which would round out the structure and function topic. And then having done that, students could move on to the next topic, something like peripheral vascular regulation with its own nested series of concepts and videos and questions, and then move on to cardiovascular disease and do the same thing. And finishing that, they'd finish this cardiovascular physiology unit. So these individual concepts, what would something like that look like? Well, let's take a look at a hypothetical example for the anatomy concept. And I've drawn out a hypothetical one here, and I'll just go ahead and label it with some titles here on the right side. So students will progress through this material sequentially one at a time, going from top to bottom, and you can think of this kind of like a subway map, giving a guide to what the students have to do and an outline as they're progressing their way through the material. So let's say the first thing in this anatomy concept is a brief introduction, and this could be followed quickly by a video on the four chambers of the heart, talking about how the blood flows between them and the split circulation between them. But then, let's say these students go ahead and they have to read some sort of text, which could be pulled from a textbook or pulled off the internet or maybe written by the instructor themselves, something that's short and sweet and reinforces what's being learned here in this anatomy concept thus far. Then the students would progress to learning about something a little bit more complicated, the valves between the four chambers and how they control the blood flow. And then, again, a different activity they could do is something like read a specific journal article. It could be something recent or something classic describing a particular aspect of physiology that's relevant here. And maybe the last thing they need to learn here is learning about the blood supply to the heart. So talking about the particular coronary arteries and where they come from. And to make sure they've learned all this material, the last thing they have to do here is go through a quiz, which would give both the students and the instructor a good idea of how well they've learned the material before moving on to the next concept. So the first thing to note is that the content itself hasn't changed. Students would have to learn this material whether or not it was presented in a lecture or in a series of short videos. So the content that's actually getting to the students is the same, it's just being delivered in a different way and being supplemented with some other materials to help those students reinforce those basic concepts. The second thing to note is that all of this material will be done by students on their own time, before they come into class. So that makes this subway map SGS, or self-guided study material, that allows students to build the base levels of Bloom's taxonomy pyramid themselves, before coming into class to then build the higher levels of the pyramid by doing the reviews and patient panels and debates that we've talked about before. Now, this content doesn't have to be delivered in a straight line. If we think about how all this material relates to each other, then it makes sense that there might be cross-links and things that are going parallel and coming back together and splitting apart, all in the hopes of building a stronger network of ideas within this broader heading of cardiovascular physiology. So one way you might organize the material could be something like this, where you have two separate streams of information coming together before you watch a summary video and read a text summary of what was learned up here. And then this itself could be combined with something larger, maybe something like this, where you have a quiz along the way and some more videos that build upon the topics that were learned earlier. And like we talked about before, at the end of all this material is a summary quiz to make sure that all of the material was learned to a sufficient degree before moving on to the next topic. So you can see that these subway maps are entirely customizable, and they're not just limited to videos, texts, and journal articles. They're driven primarily by the video content, but they can include things like specific problem sets, patient write-ups, chart reviews of an interesting patient, or really anything else you can think of that fits within the theme of the concept and helps the students learn. That way, students are ready to reach the higher levels of application, evaluation, and creation once they come into class.